Okay, welcome back to session 2 of the leadership course, which is, do you need to challenge your leadership style? So we're going to look at a couple of models throughout this program on leadership styles. One we'll look at later on will be around adapting our leadership style to be more effective in various situations. And this one in particular is about challenging our leadership style. So it's basically developing an awareness of how we lead right now and certainly in stressful situations, and building some awareness around how effective that is. Right, so is it the most effective leadership style that I need or need to adopt right now? And thinking about, okay, what is the optimum place to lead from to be most effective? And hopefully earn that status of being a great leader, if you like. So let's look at a simple model here. So if we plot two continuums here. So this one being around management. So if we define management as the achievement of objectives, right? So good management at this end of the continuum would basically mean I'm highly effective in the achievement of objectives. If I'm down here, I'm basically saying there are times when, okay, I'm not so effective in the achievement of objectives or outcomes. And then along this continuum is the extent to which I have concern for people, right? Or the extent to which I bring people along for the ride, or I engage them or empower them. So if I'm up this end, I'd be engaging, empowering people, developing people. And so at this end, I'd have little concern for people in the achievement of management objectives, for example. All right, so when we place these continuums up here, we end up with that classic four quadrant model on leadership styles. Yeah. So if we start off with, I guess, the ideal place to be. So if I'm managing well, we're achieving objectives really well, we're bringing people along for the ride, I might say, because I'm effective in the way that I achieve objectives, so I achieve, because I bring people along the ride, I achieve and engage. So achievement of management objectives and engage people along the way. Yeah. Over here, I certainly am achieving as well, right? But I'm not so good at engaging people along the way. So this is your classic command and control style of leadership. It could be a situation of where, a manager has that attitude that I'm not too concerned about how people feel about things, right? Just get the job done. The old JFDI, just effing do it, yeah? So command and control style of leadership. Down here I have, again, less regard, less concern for people, and not so focused on the achievement of management objectives. Now you might wonder, why would a manager even adopt that style, right? But as soon as we go through this model, hopefully it become apparent that, okay, there are times when someone might actually slip into that space, right? Where they just go hands off, let things happen, don't really take charge of a situation or try to manage a situation effectively. In this case, we would say, okay, it's because I'm not focused on the achievement of objectives, I'm not engaging people. Let's say, for example, there is a situation where an outcome needed to be achieved, but rather than deal with any issues in relation to it, I'm basically avoiding the situation. So this is what you would say is your avoidance approach or style of leadership. So I'm not really being effective at all here in trying to deal with it. Over here, I have a healthy focus on people in terms of regard, concern, empathy. But again, I'm not so focused on the achievement of objectives. Again, I might have more of that just she'll be right type approach, or just let it happen, we'll see how things go. So here I tend to have more of a social focus. So some of you may have experienced all of these in varying degrees from other managers, or of course you may have demonstrated some of these as well. So let's have a look at these in a little bit more detail. If we look at the classic situation in a work environment where perhaps there's a performance issue, yeah? So someone's not pulling their weight for whatever reason, they're not performing to expectations or agreed expectations, and they're not hitting the mark. How do you think someone who adopts the command control style of leadership would tackle a situation like that? Well, because they're quite focused on objectives and less focused on people. It would probably be more of a fairly confronting type of approach, right? So Jack, why aren't you pulling your weight, right? We've got to get this job done and we need you to get your act together and get it done, right? So I might not show much concern for what's going on for Jack or if there's a concern around training or a lack of skill set there. I'm just saying we need that job done. If you don't get it done, there could be ramifications. So there could be threats involved, if you like, in the way that we approach that. So that's looking at a fairly stressful situation in terms of performance issue. If we think about avoidance, okay, what might cause someone to avoid the situation altogether? If you think about, again, that same situation, performance issue, perhaps I am the kind of manager who's not used to tackling things front on. Perhaps there's situations I would rather avoid, right? So confronting conversation around performance with somebody in my team, and let's just say that person in our team has a fairly strong personality, as an example, that is. So for whatever reason, rather than deal with the situation, I'll find ways to avoid it. Yeah, it could, and we're only referring to one situation here. We'll look at a couple of others in a moment. So that might be an example of avoidance. Have you ever had a time, perhaps when you've avoided a conversation, or perhaps when you've avoided even sharing your opinion in a meeting, right? Perhaps you know something needs to be said, and perhaps you have an idea to share, but for whatever reason you hold yourself back, right? And you avoid doing so. Yeah. Over here, we've got someone who's really good with the people aspect of things. Maybe not so focused on the hard edge management in terms of the achievement of outcomes. And again, that could come down to a personality style. Again, there's very reasons as to why. We're not judging those reasons here. This is just about understanding them. So social approach would be someone who's, okay, let's just make sure everyone's getting along well. Yeah. If they had a performance issue, so again, back to that situation of dealing with a performance issue, how do we think someone in this quadrant with this leadership style would approach a performance issue with someone? Well, because they're so concerned with people's well-being, regard, happiness, for example, making sure there's a level of harmony in a team, perhaps they don't necessarily tackle it head on. They might be prone to sugarcoating, for example. All right, so they might take on a conversation and try to talk to someone and say, hey, Louise, just want to talk about what's happening with that task we asked you to do. By the way, I just want to let you know you're doing a fantastic job and you're doing this really well and this really well, this really well, but we sugarcoat it so much that the real message that we want to get through doesn't actually get through. Right, so that could be an example of how someone in this area might operate. Their final conclusion might be, well, you know what, don't worry about it, it'll sort itself out. Yeah. And then obviously here you're probably getting it is the ideal place to be in terms of leadership. How can I make sure that I adopt a leadership style, if I'm not already, that is, where I successfully achieve management outcomes, at the same time have a healthy level of concern for other people, right? But not only that, I engage, I empower them, I develop them, and get them involved, in the journey of achieving those objectives. So here, if someone was leading from this style and they had a performance issue, they'd be happy to have that conversation with that person, yeah? But they would do it in a way that still carried, enormous respect and regard for the other person. So it's a healthy conversation. Doesn't mean it's not challenging, of course, but they're happy to have that conversation and deal with an issue, still head on, but not necessarily in a confrontational, aggressive approach like a command control style, but more in terms of a respectful approach. Let's have a talk about what's going on here. Yeah. So these are examples so far, if you like, of leadership styles. We'll come back to a couple of other examples in a moment. But for now, when I show this model in most of my workshops and I ask people to nominate and tell us, where would you say you lead from most of the time? And where do you think most people go? You may have guessed it, most people do go here. Some people do go here, by the way, and they say, yeah, I still do more of that command control. I like to be in control. But most people will say here, and that's good, right? Because that's saying, okay, we know what this is like. We've experienced it. We know what kind of skills are required here. And by the way, this program is about unpacking all the skills that sit in this quadrant in terms of achieve and engage style of leadership. But the key question here is, I always think it's easy to lead well when things are going well, Yeah, anyone can lead well, really, when things are going well. I think the key test of leadership, though, is how do we lead when things aren't going so well? In other words, if stuff starts hitting the fan, for example, or there's a high level of stress, or there's a project deadline about to slip, and we've got some really high-profile stakeholders involved waiting for this thing to be delivered on time within budget, but it's slipping away from us. Or there could be an emergency situation or something else comes up. For whatever reason, high stress, stuff starting to hit the fan. What happens to our leadership style then? Because I think that is the real test of leadership. So as an example, again, we'll throw this question out quite often in our workshops and ask people to highlight, okay, where do you go? And most people do move. Even if it's within this quadrant, some people might move closer to the centre or closer to one style or the other. So, for example, if someone's moving across to here, that command and control, what they're basically saying, yeah, okay, when I get stressed, I do tend to lose it a little bit, right? And I tend to get a bit aggressive and have less regard for people. I'm more of that JFDI type of approach. Just do it, yeah? Some people will even say they go here. Yeah, if I get in a high stress situation, I'm actually not quite sure what to do. So they end up slipping into this avoid type situation. I'm not sure what to do. The team's looking for me, but I don't know. So I avoid the situation altogether, avoid having to ask or answer questions about it. So it's quite possible that might be a reason why. It could be a lack of knowledge. Or again, it could be fear around some of the key conversations we might need to have. Maybe we just don't have the skill set or the aptitude to have some of those difficult conversations that might be required when there's high stress. Some people might slip here. They might be more concerned about what's going on for the team and want to make sure, if conflict starts arising, for example, all of a sudden this need kicks in just to harmonise the situation. Let's make sure, we don't let this get out of hand in terms of conflict. And that could be their key concern. Let's just make sure everyone's getting along. And by doing that, right, it might sound like an honourable approach at first, but if I'm losing sight of the management objectives at the same time, then I might be slipping down into this social style, or social style of leadership, that is. So here's a couple of things to reflect on. Okay, so firstly, I'd like to introduce you to this concept called balcony and dance, which actually comes from a Harvard University professor by the name of Ronald Heifetz, also written a book called Leadership Without Easy Answers. It basically says that good leaders are able to get on the balcony and observe themselves while they're in the dance. And that's exactly what we are doing here. We're getting on the balcony with our leadership styles and observing how we are when we're in a dance. So as part of reflective practice, the first thing I encourage you to do is observe yourself. Just over the next week or two, see what you like, see what you can observe in your behaviours. Also, if you can, get some feedback. Sometimes the best way to get a perspective on ourselves is to ask others. And then see if you can highlight, if you don't know already, of course, what your natural leadership style is and where you go when you are under stress. And again, observing the behaviours that you demonstrate to say that you're in a particular type of leadership style. And of course, the last thing to consider here is, do I need to challenge my leadership style? In other words, is there a better place I could be leading from? Okay, so let's broaden our perspective here. I've brought back into play our iceberg model that we introduced in session 1 on why leaders need to know their why. You might recall, if you did session 1 with us, that we spent a bit of time on defining the why and understanding what that is and why we need to know it. And then we said the how is about the process of leadership, the skills and the behaviours associated with leadership. And that's what we're essentially talking about here. We're starting to talk about the process and behaviours associated with these leadership styles and the ideal place to be. So to add to your reflection, what would also be useful to think about here is our mindset that's at play depending on where we go for each of these quadrants. So if you find yourself going to one particular quadrant, and there's one here too, of course, what's the mindset at play, especially in relation to our thoughts, emotions and beliefs? Right, so our emotional patterns, for example, may play a role here as to why we go to a certain place. Yeah? Our beliefs about what leadership is may also play a role. And I think it's okay to question our beliefs. Again, we're not suggesting we shift our values, right? That's one thing we'll never ask you to do, is to change your values. But we can certainly look at the beliefs that we have around how to apply those values, right? So to give you an example of, say, an emotional pattern or thoughts. When I led teams back in my banking and finance days, I found that one place I would go to whenever challenged or stressed or confronted in any way with the situation or a challenging situation, I would go to this place of avoidance. Yeah. And so when I reflect back on why I do that, and I think about the emotion that's at play, and this is quite often true for a lot of people, the key emotion here was fear. And that tends to be a key emotion associated with a lot of these styles, except for this one here, of course. And again, if I reflect back on why did I have that emotional pattern? Why did I have that makeup? It actually makes me reflect back on my childhood. So I can safely say that I was brought up in one of those families where kids were there to be seen and not heard. Right? You never argued with your parents, especially my family, your father. So I remember once as a child proceeding to challenge my dad on just a conversation we were having. It was on something totally arbitrary. And I started to challenge and disagree with him. And it was Mum that actually said to me, "No, you don't argue with the daddy." Right? So we were never taught how to express. We were never taught how to deal with a situation, especially in relation to other people. So I would find myself avoiding those situations. But obviously, when I got into a corporate environment or an organisational environment, my biggest challenge then was an opportunity, right? Challenge and opportunity was to develop the skills and being able to have an effective conversation. You know, to be able to raise a concern or an opinion with someone, because I'd never learned how to do it. So if I was going to operate in this space, that was the key challenge. So when we refer to the title of this session, do you need to challenge your leadership style? That was certainly the leadership style I needed to challenge. All right, so whenever I went into avoidance, I really need to challenge myself as to, okay, what is it I really need to develop and grow here so that I can move into that space here as well. To give you an example of another one, I actually had a manager myself who would operate in this space quite a lot. She was great to work with. Because we always had morning teas, we always celebrated everyone's birthdays. It was really nice. It was a really nice place to be. And look, she was a great manager. You know, when things were going well, it worked because everybody knew what they were doing. The team kind of hummed because she made sure they were harmonious in nature. Yeah, she let things happen, but in a way that kind of let the team take control of the reins sometimes. But it wasn't necessarily a conscious choice of hers to operate there. And the reason that I say that is that when we went through a restructure and massive change came into the organisation, she was unable to shift. She was unable to highlight what we really needed, you know, what her team needed from her at that point. And what we needed from her was more direction. We needed more of a take control type of approach from her to let us know that everything was going to be okay. And in times of change, that might be difficult to do, but sometimes the best thing you can do is let people know that, okay, it's business as usual for the next 2 weeks, well, this is what we're looking at right now. But she wasn't able to do that, so it created a lot more uncertainty for the team when she remained here. Yeah, it was nice, and we had, you know, nice morning teas and everything like that, but the team was becoming rattled by the change. So because she was unable to provide direction, she was unable to take control of the reins when she needed to. So that might be an example of, you know, someone who stays there. Again, this is honourable, you know, this place to be because we're obviously looking after people. But thinking about what people really need from you is the key question here. So for her, the emotional pattern at play, or the beliefs and values, again, they would be personal to her. But certainly there might be a couple that need to be challenged. You know, maybe she was brought up thinking, okay, it's not nice to take charge or tell people what to do or control or direct. So she stayed in that space here. You may have already been able to think of examples of this yourself. Have you ever experienced someone in a work environment who you would say was controlling? But controlling to the extent that perhaps they didn't let you express your opinions or put your ideas across on how to perform a task or do something. They might have had that level of control. Again, we can also explore, for anyone who sits here, what's the emotional pattern and perhaps even the fear associated with letting go of control, right? And being able to move more into this space. By the way, I just want to highlight here, we're not saying that someone who operates here wouldn't necessarily take charge, take control, provide direction. They certainly would, but they would be adaptive to what's needed in the situation. We will look at this in more detail in the following sessions. For now, to add to your reflective piece here, what I encourage you to think about, okay, what's the mindset behind your leadership style, or leadership style. So understanding, of course, that this is a dynamic model. There are times when we are here, and then there are times when we might shift to other places. What's the mindset at play that causes us to shift? And the environment too, by the way. So the environment might be related to stress, for example, or performance issue. And what we're also adding to the mix is, okay, what's at play in our iceberg? What's the mindset at play here? So let's give you a little bit more to reflect on to really embed this concept. Okay, so as a final reflection, quite simply, is to consider what is the mindset that drives your leadership style, or rather your leadership styles, if you move from one style to another. And consider, what are the emotional patterns, associated with frustration, anger, fear, for example. Also, when you're leading well, what are the emotional patterns, beliefs, thoughts that drive that particular leadership style? So happy reflecting. Hope you got value out of this session and look forward to seeing you on the next one.